Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, an exploration of the 150 games that make up Atari Flashback Classics on Nintendo Switch, which is actually also available in 3 separate volumes for Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Today's game is the arcade original version of Centipede from 1981, so this game is just slightly younger than me. I was born in April of 1981 and Centipede came out in June of 1981, I believe. Its main developer was one of the only female game designers in the industry at the time, one Donna Bailey, who described the experience of working at Atari as the closest she'd ever be to working in a fraternity, or being part of a fraternity. She found her experiences pretty interesting, and one of her main aims with Centipede was to create a game that had universal appeal, that appealed to women as well as to men. And she succeeded. In various surveys done around the original time of release and slightly afterwards, Centipede had a significant female user base. It was still a majority men, I believe, but there was a much larger proportion of female players than there typically was in other arcade games at the time. Put that in context, for example, Defender, which was a popular game at the time, had an estimated 95% male player base. But Centipede appealed to everyone, really, and I can speak from personal experience on that because this is a game that my mother likes playing. So, there you go. Let's take a look.
Right. Hello. It's time for Centipede, which for some reason I have stuck in my head as the sort of thing that would have a cheesy 1950s game show style theme, like Centipede. Oh, Centipede. But I won't embarrass myself further with that. Anyway, we've already talked a little bit about the history of this game and how it was designed as a game with universal appeal so that both boys and girls can enjoy it, which is nice. It also, I've never noticed before, but it has one of the lamest demo modes I've ever seen. Because that ship is just not moving, is it? It's just sitting there. Oh, it does move. But it just stops after a while. And then starts. And I think it got stuck. So I think that's, rather than a pre-recorded demo mode, as in some games, that looks very much like it's sort of just using predefined routines to bounce that ship around and then use the actual game logic to determine what happens next. That's quite interesting. Well, it is to me anyway. Shush. Let's play Centipede. So, Centipede, as most people probably know by this point, is a simple shoot-'em-up game in which you have a centipede coming down the screen and you have to blast it. And blasting the segments of Centipede results in mushrooms, which in turn, when the centipede bumps into, will cause it to reverse direction and move a line down the screen. So the more mushrooms there are, the quicker the centipede is going to reach the bottom of the screen. So there's sort of a strategic element to the game in which you need to kind of balance your time between blasting the centipede to make progression through the stages and also clearing off some mushrooms from the stage. Especially when those things start falling from the top of the screen that just drop a whole line of mushrooms at you, which is very annoying. And that essentially is all there is to this game. So as you go further, there are a few more mechanics that start appearing. So we start with this spider, obviously, that bounces up and down, and if it hits a mushroom, it takes the mushroom with it, I believe. So it can actually help you in some ways. It is worth a decent amount of points to shoot it. And I can never quite work out if that's a randomised amount of points or if it's just determined by how long it's been on the screen, but certainly you do get a decent amount of points for shooting the spider. Down there, the good old extra life noise. Ow. I'm not very good at Centipede. I've never been especially amazing at it, but it's a game I've always liked. And like I say, part of the reason for that is the fact that it and its successor Millipede, which we'll come on to in a few weeks, are games that my whole family has always enjoyed. So not only me and my brother, who were the main game players in our household while I was growing up, but also my mother enjoyed playing it. Don't recall seeing my father playing it, but he was at least familiar with it. My dad wasn't against computer games per se, and indeed he took my brother along to what was colloquially referred to as the local computer club, which was actually the local piracy exchange for Atari 8-bit and ST games. And so he was familiar with a lot of computer games and the classics, and in the early days of owning the Atari computers, our family bought a lot of the real classics, so we've got a lot of the original Atari 8-bit games on cartridge in those unnecessarily massive boxes with the beautiful watercolor artwork on the front. Centipede, interestingly, actually wasn't one of them. We never had the Atari 8-bit version of Centipede. We did have a pirate copy of the ST version of Millipede, and that was probably the version that got played most frequently in our household. But anytime the opportunity to play the original Centipede came up, certainly I'd take it, my mother would take it, my brother would take it. It's a popular game. And it achieves that at least partly by being simple, but not to the same degree as something like Space Invaders, although admittedly my mother also used to like Space Invaders, I used to like Space Invaders. But Centipede kind of builds on that basic shoot-'em-up formula by adding some extra elements. So we've got the vertical movement for starters, which provides you with more methods of dodging when things get towards the bottom of the screen, so you can actually dodge over and under things. Or wander straight into them like I just did there. But then also you've got more than just the basic enemies as well. So you've got the basic enemies coming down from the top of the screen. The Centipede is sort of a rough analogue to the Space Invaders of Space Invaders. But besides just the simple bonus ships from Space Invaders, you've got things that have very specific mechanics attached to them. So like I say, you've got the spider is bouncing up and down. You've got the fleas, I think they're supposed to be, that are dropping the mushrooms. You've got the thing that goes across the screen and poisons the mushrooms, which makes the Centipede move a lot faster. And that leads to a real sense of progression in the game, besides just a simple increase in difficulty or speed. And so what that means is you can feel, as you work your way through the levels, you're actually starting to see new things. So you're not just seeing the same but harder, you are seeing some genuinely new things, whether that's a new colour palette, which, as I've said in a couple of previous occasions, just a simple new colour palette could be exciting back in the 8-bit era. But also you're starting to see new enemies and new mechanics along the way as well. Yeah. As you can see, I do top the high score table on this particular version of Centipede on Nintendo Switch, but I'm not doing very well today, so let's have another go. And you can continue to enjoy my ineptitude. Now, the actual sort of narrative context of Centipede, such as it is, has kind of undergone a few revisions over the years. Sort of these days, most people seem to associate the player character at the bottom with being an elf firing arrows. Sort of a little elf hanging out in the garden, so that all these bugs and things are the same size as him, but he's otherwise a human character firing arrows at them. But then there's also been interpretations of it as this being a giant space centipede and all sorts of things like that. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't really matter, but it's just quite interesting that I think this, more than any other game, has undergone the most revisions in that regard over the years. And it's also had a bunch of remakes as well, so I mean, Millipede is technically a sequel, but it's basically using the same basic mechanics, so in some respects you can consider it a remake of Centipede, but there's also been versions with more modernised graphics. I think in the PS1 era there was a briefly fashionable period when Atari tried to update a bunch of its classic games with 3D graphics and a bit more of a modern game structure. Oh no! But also, this is just one of those games that lots of other developers try to rip off and port as well, so if you think we have a cloning problem now with modern mobile games, you obviously weren't around in the 1980s when cloning classic arcade titles like Centipede was kind of a rite of passage for a lot of programmers, I think. And there's examples of all sorts of that from all across famous arcade games. So if you've watched the Atari A to Z series, in which I explore the Atari 8-bits library of games, you may well recall the game Henri by Adam Billiard, creator of Electric Glide and Chop Suey. And Henri was a shameless Mr. Dude ripoff, in which Adam Billiard basically shat this game out in order to pay for an airfare home one summer. And so, like I say, the idea of shamelessly cloning games is nothing new. It's been happening since the very beginning. But what we have here, of course, is the original. And what's interesting about some of those clones is some of those clones actually ended up being very well regarded in their own right for the various things that they added into the mix. Like we've mentioned we mentioned Jeff Minter a couple of times on these various Atari A to Z series, and a lot of Jeff Minter's games were technically mechanical clones of other games. So, for example, Attack of the Mutant Camels was a clone of The Empire Strikes Back on Atari 2600. In the case of Centipede, if you look at the original Grid Runner, that was basically Centipede in a lot of ways. So you had a sort of snake-like thing that you had to destroy. You had a ship that you could move up and down as well as left and right. You had all sorts of other enemies that behaved in specific ways that you had to learn to deal with alongside the main enemy of the piece. But Grid Runner was really well received and wasn't criticised for being a Centipede clone because it added plenty of its own identity to the mix as well. It was an enjoyable game in its own right that didn't feel like a cheap and nasty rip-off. Oops. And it didn't have mushrooms. Oh! The mushrooms have continually bugged me in Centipede. Not in a bad way or anything like that, but it's just... There's something about my brain, possibly the Asperger's, that just gives me a very sincere desire to want to clear the entire screen of those mushrooms. And I don't think this was an uncommon desire. And indeed, in most of the Atari 2600 and arcade ports we've seen over the years, there's been some sort of achievement or reward or medal or something for actually successfully clearing the screen of mushrooms. It's surprisingly difficult to do. And in most cases you probably want to try and do it on the first level because that's before these fleas start turning up and adding more mushrooms to the screen faster than you can get rid of them. But where the difficulty comes in is... Obviously, the Centipede is continually descending down the screen. And once it gets to the bottom, you have to place a very strong focus on dodging it. And if you've inadvertently broken it into several segments by that point, that can get quite challenging. But yeah, success in Centipede is as much about good mushroom management as it is about accurate blasting, so... The mushrooms themselves aren't worth many points, of course, but they do play a key role in your success. There's an extra life. Extra lives come at 12,000 points in this, rather than the convention of the time, which tended to be 10,000 points. And like most arcade games, I believe there was a dip switch setting you could change to determine when the extra lives would appear, but the default appears to be 12,000. That's certainly the default in this Nintendo Switch version. Yeah, you see that wiggly fast descent down the screen? That's what happens when the centipede hits the poison mushrooms. So you can deal with that, but you probably want to... you probably want to try and get rid of those poison mushrooms as soon as possible, because they can get quite irritating very quickly, especially when there's a lot of them. Oh, the other thing you'll notice as well is when you're down to your last few segments of Centipede, you'll actually start getting more segments spawning from the side of the screen until you destroy all of them. And that's another mechanic that makes getting rid of all the mushrooms very difficult. Oh, I beat my high score. That's exciting. Right. Oh, go away with your poison bullshit. He's doing it right at the top of the screen as well, so that makes it really hard to clear them out as well. Alright, let's focus on trying to get rid of those and just avoiding danger. So while the centipede is still long, it moves relatively slowly, and it's quite easy to avoid. Oh, another extra life! I'm doing very well today. I feel like I say this a lot on this series, but this is quite possibly the best ever game of Centipede I've ever had. Oh, obviously I don't say the best ever game of Centipede I've ever had, but certainly a lot of these recordings have ended up being my best ever playthrough of these games, which is always quite satisfying and nice. Of course, I appreciate that my own best ever performance in Centipede is probably nothing compared to the best ever worldwide performance of Centipede, but, you know, you don't always have to be the world's best. Sometimes you can just be the best in your household. Or the best out of your friends. Not quite 30,000. In fact, with that in mind, though, even given what I just said, I'm just gonna... Oh, no. I spelled my name wrong. I can be... Yeah, okay, let's be... PK for today. PKB. There we go. That's me. It would be when I beat the high score by such a massive margin as well, wouldn't it? I'm just going to have a quick look at the leaderboards. Just out of curiosity's sake. So presently I am the 26th best person in the world on the Nintendo Switch version of Centipede for the arcade. Which is a very specific thing, I know. Let's just have a look at the top score just to be depressing. 77,949. That's actually not quite as high as I expected it might be. But it's still obviously a fair jump from third place, which is 42,000, which I feel might be achievable for me with a bit of practice. But 77,000, that's that would have been quite a long playthrough as well. But probably a fair few extra lives along the way as well. Alright, let's have one more go before we finish for today, just to see if I can actually possibly beat that high score and put my correct initials in, but I'm not promising anything. This is the last playthrough. Let's make it count. Oh! That is not making it count. That is getting hit by a flea. The irritating thing about the fleas, of course, is that they take 2 hits to kill, and the first one makes them double in speed. So if you don't hit them very accurately, what you can end up doing is actually just dropping a high-speed flea on your head. Which is unhelpful, of course. Go away! I don't want your stupid mushrooms. Ah! I'll keep my promise for once, though. This is definitely the last time. Definitely the last playthrough for today. There's an extra life. That's good. That is a pleasant... No! I'm just going to shut up. Oh. Well, what a way to finish, eh? Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. This is PKB signing out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.